January 30th, 1944. Anzio beachhead, Italy. The pencil trembled in Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann's hand as he pressed against the concrete wall of his command bunker, recording what he had just witnessed through the observation periscope. The Americans possess artillery of unimaginable power. Bunker Luisa no longer exists, 4 feet of reinforced concrete, gone in an instant. Through smoke and dust, he could see the crater where the strong point had stood for 8 months. The bunker, rated to withstand direct hits from 210mm shells according to Wehrmacht engineering standards, had been deleted from existence by a single round from an American super-heavy gun, firing from beyond visual range. 32 men of the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division had vanished along with tons of concrete and steel. The weapon responsible was the M1 240mm howitzer, making its combat debut with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. What Hoffmann and thousands of German defenders would discover in the coming months was that every assumption about fortification warfare had become obsolete overnight. The US Army had deployed a weapon that could transform the strongest bunker into a tomb with mathematical precision. The M1 240mm howitzer emerged from a 1940 US Army ordnance study that reached a stark conclusion. Existing American artillery could not defeat modern European fortifications. The largest gun then available, the 155mm Long Tom, could damage but not reliably destroy reinforced concrete bunkers that were becoming standard in German defensive doctrine. The specifications demanded seemed impossible. A mobile weapon firing a 360-pound shell over 14 miles with sufficient accuracy to hit individual bunkers, capable of penetrating 6 feet of reinforced concrete. The entire system had to be transportable by standard military vehicles, unlike the massive railway guns of World War I. What emerged from Watervliet Arsenal in New York was an engineering masterpiece. Weighing 64,700 pounds in firing position, the M1 required a crew of 14 men and could fire 1 round every 3 minutes when operating at maximum efficiency. The barrel alone weighed 23,000 pounds and measured 35 feet in length, requiring specialized transport on a 6-wheeled wagon. Setup time averaged 8 hours, including excavation of a recoil pit and assembly using the specialized M2 crane that accompanied each weapon. Production began in November 1942 with 6 pilot models. By 1944, Watervliet Arsenal had achieved a production rate of 13 guns per month, ultimately manufacturing exactly 315 units before production ceased in August 1945. Each gun cost $380,000, equivalent to 12 Sherman tanks, but their strategic value would prove incalculable. The 697th and 698th Field Artillery Battalions arrived at the Anzio beachhead in January 1944, bringing the first M1 240mm howitzers to combat. The German 14th Panzer Corps had transformed the surrounding hills into a fortress system, with interlocking bunkers commanding every approach to the Allied positions. On January 30th, 1944, at 14:30 hours, the 697th fired the first 240mm round in combat, targeting a German observation post on the Alban Hills. The round traveled 23,000 yards, over 13 miles, and scored a direct hit. The bunker, along with its observation equipment and crew, ceased to exist. Major Herman E. Smith, commanding the 697th, documented the weapon's psychological impact in his unit history. After our first day of firing, German prisoners reported complete demoralization in their units. They spoke of earthquake shells that made the ground shake for hundreds of meters around impact. Many refused to occupy bunkers after witnessing our strikes. The mathematics of destruction at Anzio were precisely recorded. Rounds fired, 2,847. Bunkers engaged, 67. Bunkers destroyed, 61. Average rounds per bunker, 4.8. Maximum range achieved, 25,100 yards. The German 715th Infantry Division's war diary, captured after Rome's liberation, noted, "American super-heavy artillery makes our fortified positions untenable. Losses from single shells exceed those from day-long conventional bombardments." The breakthrough at Monte Cassino in May 1944 demonstrated the 240mm howitzer's ability to crack the toughest defensive positions. The Gustav Line had held for months against repeated Allied assaults, anchored on the ancient monastery that German paratroopers had transformed into a fortress. The 240th Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 8 M1 howitzers, joined Operation Diadem on May 11, 1944. Positioned near Mignano, they could reach every German position along the Gustav Line. Their primary targets were the reinforced bunkers built into the mountainside below the monastery. British Major General Francis Tucker, whose 4th Indian Division had suffered terribly in earlier assaults, witnessed the 240mm bombardment and reported, "The American super-heavy guns achieved what months of bombing and conventional artillery had failed to accomplish." Each round that struck home eliminated a German strongpoint completely. The psychological effect on the defenders was decisive. They understood that nowhere was safe. The 240mm howitzers fired continuously for 72 hours during the breakthrough battle, expending 1,847 rounds. Post-battle analysis showed that of 43 major German bunkers targeted, 39 were completely destroyed. The 4 surviving positions had been abandoned by their crews after near misses. The effectiveness of the 240mm howitzer stemmed not just from its massive shell, but from the entire American fire control system. The Fire Direction Center (FDC) concept, refined through 3 years of combat, allowed unprecedented accuracy and coordination. Forward observers equipped with SCR-610 radios could call for fire from positions miles from the guns. Their target locations were transmitted to the FDC, where trained personnel used graphical firing tables, slide rules, and meteorological data to compute firing solutions. Within 4 minutes of a call for fire, rounds could be impacting targets over 14 miles away. The time-on-target technique multiplied the psychological impact. Multiple batteries, firing from different positions at staggered times, could place all their shells on target simultaneously. A German bunker might receive 6 240mm rounds within a 2-second window, over a ton of high explosive arriving without warning. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas B. Hedekin, commander of the 245th Field Artillery Battalion, explained in a 1944 report, "We don't fire barrages. We conduct surgical strikes. A forward observer identifies a specific bunker, we compute the solution, and we drop 1 or 2 rounds directly on it. The precision terrifies the Germans more than volume of firewood." 4 M1 240mm howitzers attached to 19th Corps participated in Operation Cobra, the July 1944 breakthrough from the Normandy beachhead. The German 352nd Infantry Division had fortified every hedgerow and crossroads around St. Lo, creating a defensive maze that had stalled the Allied advance for weeks. The 272nd Field Artillery Battalion brought their 240mm howitzers into action on July 24, systematically destroying German strongpoints that had survived the massive carpet bombing. Hill 122, the key terrain feature dominating St. Lo, was fortified with concrete bunkers built into the reverse slopes, immune to aerial bombardment. Technical Sergeant Raymond Jones, Section Chief with Battery A, 272 Field Artillery, later testified, "We could see the Germans thought they were safe in those reverse slope positions. Our observer called in the coordinates. We fired 3 rounds for effect. When the smoke cleared, there was just a hole in the hillside where the bunker had been." The psychological impact was immediate. The German 3rd Parachute Division, elite troops who had fought at Cassino, began abandoning prepared positions rather than face 240mm bombardment. Their commander, General Richard Schimpf, was captured on July 31 and told interrogators, Your super-heavy artillery made static defense impossible. My men, veterans who had never retreated, ran from their bunkers. The assault on the Gothic Line in northern Italy during autumn 1944 proved the 240mm howitzer's value in mountain warfare. German engineers had spent a year constructing fortifications along the Apennine ridges, using the mountainous terrain to create positions thought impervious to artillery. The 697th Field Artillery Battalion, veterans of Anzio and the drive to Rome, positioned their howitzers in the valleys below the Gothic Line in September 1944. Using high-angle fire, they could drop shells almost vertically onto German positions carved into the reverse slopes of mountains. The destruction of the Futa Pass fortifications demonstrated the weapon's capabilities. The pass, controlling the main route to Bologna, was defended by elaborate bunker complexes built by Organization Todt. On September 16, 1944, the 697th began systematic bombardment of these positions. Private First Class Donald Matthews, ammunition handler with the 697, wrote home, "The shells go up so high they disappear into the clouds, then come straight down on the German bunkers. The explosion shakes the entire mountain. After we hit a bunker, there's nothing left but a crater." The Futa Pass fell in 5 days. German casualties from bunker collapses exceeded those from direct combat. The 4th Parachute Division's war diary recorded, "American super-heavy shells penetrate overhead cover previously thought adequate. Morale is collapsing as troops refuse to occupy fortifications." The systematic destruction of the Siegfried Line beginning in September 1944 represented the 240mm howitzer's greatest contribution to Allied victory. The West Wall stretched 390 miles from the Netherlands to Switzerland, comprising over 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and fortified positions built between 1936 and 1940. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion brought their M1 howitzers to the Siegfried Line near Aachen in September 1944. The fortifications they faced were formidable. Type 10 bunkers with walls 3 to 4 feet thick, command bunkers with 8-foot thick walls, and infantry positions with interlocking fields of fire. The first major test came at the Scharnhorst Line, an extension of the Siegfried Line defending Aachen. On October 8, 1944, the 265th began preparatory fires for the 1st Infantry Division's assault. In 6 hours, they fired 238 rounds, destroying 19 of 22 targeted bunkers. Corporal Robert Williams, forward observer with the 16th Infantry Regiment, witnessed the bombardment. Each 240mm hit was like a small earthquake. Concrete bunkers we'd been told would take days to reduce were gone in minutes. The Germans inside never had a chance. The pattern repeated across the entire front. The 278th Field Artillery Battalion supporting V Corps destroyed 73 bunkers in the Schnee-Eifel region during December 1944. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion, operating near Metz, eliminated the fortress ring around the city in November 1944, firing over 3,000 rounds in 2 weeks. The Vosges Mountains campaign of October to November 1944 presented unique challenges. German forces had fortified the heavily forested ridges with bunkers camouflaged by thick tree cover, invisible to aerial reconnaissance, and protected from conventional artillery by terrain. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion developed new techniques for forest warfare. Using proximity-fused shells when available, they could achieve airbursts above the tree canopy, with blast effects penetrating downward onto bunkers. When using conventional shells, they employed box and one tactics: 4 rounds at the corners of a suspected position, then 1 directly in the center. Master Sergeant Harold Anderson, Chief of Section with the 265, described the technique. The forest made observation difficult, but the 240mm didn't need precision. Even a near miss would collapse bunkers through ground shock, We'd fire, wait for the dust to settle, and the infantry would find nothing but craters and bodies. The liberation of Strasbourg on November 23, 1944, was preceded by 240mm bombardment of the outer fortifications. The German 553rd Infantry Division abandoned their positions after losing 12 bunkers in 90 minutes of targeted fire. Post-war analysis by U.S. Army engineers revealed why the 240mm howitzer proved so effective against fortifications. The concrete-piercing shell, designated M17, used a hardened steel cap backed by 360 pounds of mass traveling at 2,300 feet per second. This delivered approximately 2.8 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy to an impact area of less than 20 square inches. The resulting pressure, exceeding 200,000 psi, surpassed any concrete's compression strength. More critically, the delayed fuse allowed penetration of 3 to 6 feet before detonation. The explosion inside the concrete mass created what engineers termed sympathetic fracturing. Shock waves reflecting off steel reinforcement created complex stress patterns that shattered entire structures from within. The high-explosive shell, designated M114, contained 49 pounds of TNT with aluminum powder additives, increasing blast effect by 40% over pure TNT. When fused for surface burst, it created craters 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep in average soil, 30 feet wide and 12 feet deep in rocky ground. The deployment of 240mm howitzers required extraordinary logistical support that showcased American organizational capabilities. Each battalion needed daily 50 to 100 shells, 18 to 36 tons, 2,000 gallons of fuel for prime movers and generators, specialized maintenance equipment, dedicated ammunition carriers with reinforced suspensions. The ammunition supply chain stretched from Watervliet Arsenal to the front lines, sometimes covering 3,000 miles. Each shell required precision forging of the shell body, machining to tolerances of 0.01 inches, careful filling with explosive compounds, installation of precision fuses, individual inspection and proof testing. By March 1945, the U.S. Army had stockpiled over 500,000 240mm rounds in European depots. Monthly consumption peaked at 35,000 rounds during the Rhine crossings. This represented industrial capacity that Germany, Japan, or even the Soviet Union could not match. The Rhine crossing operations of March 1945 demonstrated the 240mm howitzer at peak effectiveness. Operation Plunder, Montgomery's set-piece crossing on March 23 to 24, was preceded by the largest artillery preparation of the Western War. American 12th Corps contributed 12 240mm howitzers to the bombardment. The target was the Wesel fortified zone, where the German 84th Infantry Division had constructed elaborate bunker systems along the east bank. Beginning at 1700 hours on March 23, the 240mm howitzers began systematic destruction of identified positions. Captain William Morrison, commanding Battery B, 278th Field Artillery Battalion, recorded, "We had aerial photographs showing every bunker. Starting from the north, we worked our way south, engaging each position with 4 to 6 rounds. By midnight, we'd destroyed 31 bunkers and damaged 12 more." The crossing met minimal resistance. German survivors reported complete demoralization after watching their fortifications disintegrate. The 84th Division's strength returns showed 2,400 casualties from artillery alone, most from bunker collapses. The encirclement of Army Group B in the Ruhr Pocket, April 1 to 18, 1945, saw 240mm howitzers reducing industrial facilities converted to fortresses. German forces had fortified factories using reinforced concrete industrial structures as defensive positions. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion supported the reduction of the pocket's northern sector. The Krupp Steel Works in Essen, fortified with additional concrete reinforcement, was targeted on April 9. 24 240mm rounds transformed the main factory buildings into twisted rubble. Staff Sergeant James Peterson, forward observer with the 313th Infantry Regiment, witnessed the destruction. These weren't normal buildings. They were industrial fortresses with walls 3 feet thick. The 240mm shells went through them like tissue paper. The psychological effect on the defenders was total. They surrendered in masses after seeing what happened to the Krupp works. Model's Army Group B, initially 430,000 strong, surrendered after just 18 days. Intelligence reports credited the rapid collapse partially to the systematic destruction of fortified positions by super-heavy artillery, which convinced defenders that resistance was futile. The Watervliet Arsenal's production of 240mm howitzers represented American industrial mobilization at its finest. The facility, established in 1813, had become America's premier large-caliber gun factory by World War II. Production statistics tell the story. November 1942, 6 pilot models. 1943, 72 units. Monthly average, 6. 1944, 158 units. Monthly average 13. January to August 1945, 79 units. Monthly average, 10. Total production, 315 units. The workforce peaked at 9,100 employees working 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Women comprised 35% of the workforce, performing precision machining operations previously considered impossible for female workers. The Arsenal's monthly payroll exceeded $3 million, making it the Capital District's largest employer. Each gun barrel required 65 tons of special steel, 847 individual machining operations, 72 hours of precision boring, heat treatment in furnaces reaching 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, individual proof firing with overpressure charges. The quality control was exceptional. Of 315 guns produced, only 2 failed acceptance testing, both due to minor recoil mechanism issues quickly corrected. No M1 240mm howitzer ever failed catastrophically in combat. American production of 240mm ammunition defied German comprehension. Watervliet Arsenal alone produced 2,000 rounds monthly by 1944. Additional production at Picatinny Arsenal and civilian contractors brought total monthly production to 10,000 rounds by early 1945. Each round represented a masterpiece of mass production shell body forged from 4140 chrome molybdenum steel, machined to tolerances of plus or minus 0.01 inches, filled with 49 pounds of grade A TNT, fitted with precision machined rotating bands, individually gauged and inspected. The logistics chain delivered this ammunition with remarkable efficiency. Liberty ships carried 240mm rounds as deck cargo, each ship transporting up to 500 rounds. The Red Ball Express truck convoys included specialized ammunition sections with reinforced vehicles designed for the 360-pound shells. By April 1945, U.S. forces in Europe had expended 118,429 rounds of 240mm ammunition, while maintaining theater reserves exceeding 100,000 rounds. This profligate expenditure, impossible for any other belligerent, multiplied the weapon's psychological impact. Operating the M1 240mm howitzer demanded exceptional teamwork and physical endurance. Each 14-man crew functioned as a precisely coordinated team, with every member essential to the weapon's operation. The crew positions included Chief of Section, NCO commanding the piece. Gunner, responsible for laying the weapon. Assistant gunner. Operated the breech. Number 3 to 8, ammunition handlers. Number 9 to 10, operated the M2 crane. Number 11 to 12, powder handlers. Number 13 to 14, vehicle drivers security. Loading the weapon required extraordinary coordination. The 360-pound projectile was lifted by crane, guided by 4 men into the breach, then rammed home hydraulically. The powder charge, up to 8 separate bags, was loaded behind the shell. The entire process took 90 seconds for a well-trained crew. Private First Class Michael Sullivan, ammunition handler with the 697 Field Artillery Battalion, described the physical demands. After 10 rounds, everyone was exhausted. The concussion from firing was like being punched in the chest. We rotated positions every hour to maintain efficiency. But knowing what our shells did to German bunkers kept us motivated. The forward observers directing 240mm fire held one of the war's most dangerous jobs. Positioned with frontline infantry, often beyond friendly lines, they identified targets and adjusted fire with lethal precision. Lieutenant Robert Anderson, forward observer with the 265th Field Artillery Battalion, survived 187 days in combat. His personal record included directing the destruction of 47 German bunkers. In a 1985 interview, he reflected, "Calling in 240mm was like summoning Thor's hammer. I'd identify a bunker, radio the coordinates, and minutes later it would cease to exist. The power was intoxicating but sobering. Each shell might kill dozens of enemy soldiers." The observer's equipment included BC scope, 20 times magnification, M1 plotting board, SCR 610 radio, 48-pound backpack unit, map case with aerial photographs, compass and rangefinder. The psychological burden was significant. Forward observers could see the human cost of their actions through their scopes. German soldiers fleeing bunkers, the wounded, the dead. Many reported nightmares decades after the war. Captured German documents and post-war interviews revealed the terror inspired by 240mm bombardment. The Wehrmacht's experience fighting the Soviets, who relied on mass artillery barrages, had not prepared them for American precision firepower. A November 1944 report from the German 7th Army captured at Metz stated, "Enemy super-heavy artillery represents a new form of warfare. Individual bunkers are engaged with observed fire of extreme accuracy. Casualties from single shells exceed those from conventional barrage. Morale effect is catastrophic. Troops refuse to occupy forward bunkers." The German 19th Army, defending the Vosges, reported 60% of casualties came from artillery, with 240mm fire causing disproportionate losses despite its limited volume. Bunkers that had protected troops for months became death traps once American observers identified them. Post-war interviews with German veterans consistently emphasized the psychological impact. Former Oberst Heinrich Zimmermann, who commanded a regiment in the Siegfried Line, stated in 1962, "Regular artillery we could endure, but those monster shells broke our spirit. When you saw a bunker disappear, you understood that nowhere was safe. Many of my men shot themselves rather than wait for the next shell." The M1 240mm howitzer was part of an Allied super-heavy artillery force that included British and Soviet weapons, but American industrial capacity made the difference. Comparative production figures: US M1 240mm howitzer, 315 units. British BL, 7.2-inch howitzer, 36 units. Soviet 280mm BR, 5 mortar, 47 units. German 24cm K3 railway gun, 8 units. The American advantage lay not just in quantity but in mobility and sustained operations. While German and Soviet super-heavy guns required rail transport or extensive site preparation, the M1 could be towed slowly by tracked vehicles and emplaced anywhere with suitable ground. British observers consistently praised American super-heavy artillery. Major General Sidney Kirkman, artillery commander for the 13th Corps, wrote, "The American 240mm howitzer achieved what our own heavy guns could not: the systematic, rapid destruction of fortified positions. At Cassino, these weapons were largely responsible for the breakthrough." As Allied forces drove into Germany proper in early 1945, the 240mm howitzer continued its destructive work. Every German city designated a fortress by Hitler faced systematic bombardment by super-heavy artillery. The siege of Aschaffenburg, March 25 to April 3, 1945, demonstrated the weapon's urban warfare capabilities. The German 36th Infantry Division had fortified the medieval city, barricading streets and converting buildings into strongpoints. The 265th Field Artillery Battalion positioned 4 howitzers across the main river, systematically destroying defensive positions. The precision was remarkable. Forward observers could place 240mm rounds through specific buildings without damaging adjacent structures. This selective destruction convinced many German commanders to surrender rather than see their cities leveled. The capture of Nuremberg, April 16 to 20, 1945, saw 3 240mm battalions in action. The medieval fortifications, reinforced with modern concrete, crumbled under bombardment. The 698th Field Artillery Battalion destroyed 8 major bunkers in the old city walls in 4 hours of firing on April 19. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, American 240mm howitzers had made a decisive contribution to victory. The final statistics from U.S. Army Ordnance total rounds fired in ETO, 118,429. Bunkers fortifications engaged, 3,847. Confirmed destroyed, 3,114, 81%. Damaged beyond use, 489, 13%. Rounds per target destroyed, 38 average. Maximum range achieved in combat, 25,255 yards. Gun tube replacements required, 23. Catastrophic failures, 0. The human cost inflicted by 240mm fire is harder to quantify. German records, often incomplete, suggest 15,000 to 20,000 casualties directly from 240mm bombardment, with psychological casualties possibly doubling that figure. Combat experience led to continuous improvements in 240mm howitzer employment. Early operations revealed that the 8-hour emplacement time limited tactical flexibility. By 1945, experienced crews had reduced setup time to under 4 hours through improved procedures and equipment. The development of mechanical fuse setters increased rate of fire from 1 round per 3 minutes to 1 per 2 minutes for sustained operations. Improved powder formulations extended barrel life from 500 to 800 rounds between replacements. The most significant innovation was the integration of photo reconnaissance with fire planning. By 1945, forward observers received annotated aerial photographs showing every potential target, numbered and gridded. This reduced mission processing time from 10 minutes to under 4. While this narrative focuses on European operations, 240mm howitzers saw limited Pacific service. 6 weapons supported the Philippines campaign, destroying Japanese fortifications on Corregidor in February 1945. The concrete-piercing shells proved especially effective against Japanese cave fortifications, sealing entrances and creating concussion casualties deep inside mountains. Plans existed for extensive 240mm deployment in Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan. The U.S. Army projected requirements for 100 howitzers to reduce Japanese homeland fortifications. Japan's surrender made this unnecessary, but captured Japanese officers later admitted that their defensive plans had not accounted for American super-heavy artillery capabilities. Military historians consider the M1 240mm howitzer a revolutionary weapon that fundamentally changed siege warfare. Its combination of mobility, accuracy, and destructive power rendered traditional fortifications obsolete. The U.S. Army's official history concluded, the 240mm howitzer provided the ground forces with a capability previously reserved for naval gunfire or strategic bombing. It could destroy any fortification with surgical precision, profoundly affecting both the physical and psychological dimensions of warfare. Soviet observers given access to captured German fortifications were particularly impressed. Marshal Vasily Chuikov, who had commanded at Stalingrad, examined destroyed Siegfried Line bunkers and commented, "The Americans found the solution to modern fortifications, not mass but precision. One gun achieving what 100 of ours could not." The terror inspired by 240mm bombardment left lasting psychological scars. The German Veterans Association documented high rates of specific phobias among survivors. Seismophobia, fear of vibrations, 73% of bunker survivors. Claustrophobia, 67%. Phonophobia, fear of loud sounds, 89%. Dr. Hans Müller, treating veterans in Munich during the 1950s, identified bunker syndrome, a complex of symptoms including nightmares, panic attacks, and inability to enter concrete structures. His research suggested that the sudden, complete destruction of supposedly safe positions created unique trauma patterns. American veterans also carried psychological burdens. Forward observers reported recurring dreams about calling in fire missions. Gun crews described permanent hearing damage despite protective equipment. The physical sensation of firing, the ground shock, chest compression, and overwhelming sound remained vivid decades later. The successful deployment of 240mm howitzers represented American industrial philosophy, mass production of precision weapons. While Germany produced individual masterpieces like the Karlgerät 600mm mortar, 6-built, or Schwerer Gustav 800mm railway gun, 2-built, America mass-produced effective weapons. The comparison is instructive at German 600mm Karlgerät, 6 produced, 24-hour setup, 1 round per 10 minutes. American 240mm M1, 315 produced, 4-hour setup, 1 round per 2 minutes. This represented different approaches to warfare. Germany sought wonder weapons, Wunderwaffen, that would provide decisive advantage through technological superiority. America sought producible weapons that would provide advantage through quantity and reliability. The 240mm howitzer program cost approximately $120 million, $1945, including development, production, and ammunition. This equaled the cost of 40 B-24 bombers or 1,600 Sherman tanks. Yet the strategic impact, the ability to reduce any fortification quickly, justified the investment. The M1 240mm howitzer's influence extended beyond World War II. Its success demonstrated the value of super-heavy mobile artillery, influencing Cold War weapon development. The Soviet Union developed the 2S4 Tilepan 240mm self-propelled mortar, citing American World War II experience. The fire control techniques developed for the 240mm, particularly the FDC system and integration of aerial reconnaissance, became standard for all artillery. Modern GPS-guided munitions trace their conceptual ancestry to the precision fire missions of 1944 to 45. Several M1 howitzers survive as monuments. Fort Sill, Oklahoma, displays serial number 14, which fired the first combat round at Anzio. The Watervliet Arsenal Museum preserves number 1, the prototype that proved super-heavy mobile artillery was possible. The M1 240mm howitzer achieved something rare in military history. It rendered an entire category of military architecture obsolete. For centuries, fortifications had provided defensive advantage. Concrete and steel bunkers represented the ultimate expression of this philosophy. The 240mm howitzer ended that era in 18 months of combat. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in his post-war memoir, wrote, "The 240mm howitzer gave us the ability to crack any defensive position quickly and economically. It saved thousands of Allied lives by eliminating fortifications that would have required costly infantry assaults." Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, defending Italy and later southern Germany, offered the enemy's perspective. The American 240mm gun was a weapon against which we had no answer. Our bunkers, built at enormous cost in materials and labor, became death traps. The psychological effect was devastating. Troops lost faith in any defensive position. Behind the statistics were individual soldiers whose service brought victory. Their stories, preserved in unit histories and personal memoirs, humanize the mechanical destruction. Sergeant David E. Mathis, 697th Field Artillery Battalion, served from Anzio through the war's end, participating in the destruction of over 100 enemy positions. In a 1990 interview, he reflected, "We knew we had something special. When the infantry called for us, we could eliminate obstacles that had stopped entire divisions. But we also knew every shell might kill dozens of enemy soldiers. It was necessary, but it wasn't easy." Lieutenant Harold Sanders, 272nd Field Artillery Battalion, directed fire during the Normandy breakout. His forward observer team spent 73 consecutive days in combat, calling in missions that destroyed 31 German strongpoints. The 240mm was our ace in the hole. When nothing else worked, when the Germans thought they were safe, we could reach out and touch them. It saved American lives, and that's what mattered. These men, and thousands like them, operated weapons of unprecedented destructive power with professional precision. They transformed American industrial might into battlefield victory, one devastating round at a time. German tactical doctrine evolved rapidly in response to 240mm bombardment, though no truly effective countermeasure emerged. By late 1944, Wehrmacht defensive instructions emphasized dispersion and camouflage over fortification. The German 7th Army's December 1944 tactical directive stated, "Fixed fortifications must be abandoned when American super-heavy artillery is present. Troops should construct field positions, frequently relocated, with overhead cover sufficient only for conventional artillery. Bunkers concentrate casualties rather than preventing them." This represented a complete reversal of German defensive doctrine developed over decades. The Prussian tradition of elaborate field fortifications, refined through World War I and the Eastern Front, crumbled before American firepower. Some German innovations showed promise. Dummy positions heated to simulate occupation sometimes drew fire away from actual positions. Smoke generators obscured observation. Electronic jamming attempted to disrupt American radio communications. But these measures only delayed the inevitable. General Hasso von Muntefeld, commanding 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, summarized German frustration. "We could accept being outproduced, that was expected fighting America. But the precision of their heavy artillery made every defensive position vulnerable. We were not just outgunned, but outclassed." Operating 240mm howitzers extracted a price from American forces as well. Gun crews suffered extensive hearing damage. Post-war Veterans Administration studies found 90% of 240mm veterans had significant hearing loss. The concussion from firing caused chronic traumatic encephalopathy in some long-service crew members. Forward observers suffered the highest casualty rates of any artillery specialty. Of 127 forward observers trained for 240mm battalions, 31 were killed and 43 wounded, a 58% casualty rate. Their exposed positions and the value Germans placed on eliminating them made survival unlikely. Mechanical failures, while rare, could be catastrophic. On March 3, 1945, a premature detonation in the bore of a 240mm howitzer near Prum killed 5 crew members. Investigation revealed a faulty fuse, leading to improved quality control procedures. The logistical burden was immense. Each 240mm battalion required 67 vehicles, including specialized prime movers, cranes, and ammunition carriers. Fuel consumption averaged 2,000 gallons daily when moving. The weapon's weight damaged roads, requiring engineer support to maintain supply routes. The M12 40mm howitzer represented American warfare philosophy at its most effective. Overwhelming firepower delivered with precision, backed by unlimited industrial production. While individual German bunkers might have been stronger, American industry could destroy them faster than Germany could build them. This mathematical certainty of victory through production terrified German commanders more than tactical defeat. They could counter superior generalship with clever tactics, offset numerical disadvantage with superior training. But they could not answer unlimited precision firepower backed by infinite ammunition supply. The 240mm howitzer was ultimately a manifestation of American industrial democracy, defeating European totalitarianism. Free workers in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Watervliet produced weapons that destroyed fortifications built by slave labor. The triumph was not just military but moral, proof that democratic societies could marshal greater power than dictatorships. The German encounter with American 240mm howitzers was more than military defeat. It was psychological transformation through technological shock. Soldiers who had believed in the supremacy of German engineering, the impregnability of concrete fortifications, and the advantage of prepared defense discovered that American industrial capacity had rendered their entire military doctrine obsolete. The numbers tell only part of the story. 315 howitzers produced, 118,429 rounds fired, 3,114 bunkers destroyed. The true impact was measured in the complete collapse of German faith in fixed defenses. Every shattered bunker demonstrated American superiority, not just in firepower, but in every aspect of modern warfare: logistics, production, technology, and organization. The 240mm howitzer did more than destroy fortifications. It demolished the psychological foundations of German resistance. Wehrmacht soldiers learned to fear not just the shell, but everything it represented: unlimited ammunition, precision fire control, mechanical reliability, and the terrible efficiency of American industrial democracy. In the ruins of the Siegfried Line lay not just broken concrete, but the shattered remnants of Nazi Germany's military pretensions. The thunder of the 240mm howitzer was the sound of American industrial might proclaiming inevitable victory. Every German soldier who heard it understood its terrible meaning. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy and lost. The terror would echo long after the guns fell silent. Veterans would spend decades trying to process the trauma of watching their supposedly impregnable fortifications vanish in clouds of pulverized concrete. But from that terror came transformation, the recognition that the age of fixed fortifications had ended, and with it, any military doctrine based on static defense. The M12 40mm howitzer had spoken with the voice of American industry, and its message was unmistakable. In modern industrial warfare, there is no defensive position that cannot be destroyed, no fortification that cannot be breached, no bunker that cannot become a tomb. The Germans were not simply terrified when US 240mm howitzers obliterated their fortresses. They were transformed by the revelation of American power that made resistance genuinely futile. In the end, the greatest victory of the 240mm howitzer was not the fortifications it destroyed, but the minds it changed. German soldiers who had begun the war believing in their technological superiority ended it, understanding that they had been overwhelmed by an industrial democracy that could transform raw materials into precision weapons, faster than totalitarianism could build concrete walls. The thunder of the 240mm howitzer was democracy's answer to tyranny, delivered one earth-shaking round at a time.